John, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I'm very excited for this conversation. As I was just saying, I have met Jeremy through Tom Vranis, who is a dear friend of mine, and like the amount of mutual connections. And your whole shtick is, podcasting breeds your network and it explodes your network. And shocking that we have a lot of people that we know in common.
Right.
And I'm just really excited, John, to get your take, man, because you've been podcasting, is it a decade now?
I started podcasting around 2010. It was just like rudimentary, like interviewing people, recording it, uploading it. And it really kind of like started more like 2011, 2012 kind of time frame. It could be like a real podcast.
Which I'm thinking about the technology and the setup back then. I got a ton of rabbit holes we could go into, but what I was thinking for this conversation, man, is love to have conversations about what you've learned from interviewing so many people. But then I think we can like weave the podcasting strategy throughout our whole conversation, because I know that's what you guys do, and I want the audience to know what your guys are up to. Because John, I get over the last 8 years, people are like, hey, how do you do the podcast? I'm like, I'm not in the business of podcasting. I'm just doing it for my business, and so I can just direct people your direction. But let's just start at the square one, man. Like, how in the heck in 2010 did you get into podcasting?
Yeah. And you know what? We were like you for the first like 5 or 6 years, where we just did it and we told everyone, you should start a podcast. It's amazing. It's great. You can talk to all these people. You can build relationships, and no one would do it. They would ask stupid questions, or they'd be like, I don't know what to call it. It's like, that is not the thing that should stop you from doing it. And, so we eventually got into the business of doing it. But how did I start in 2010? It literally just became, I started listening to other podcasts, some very early podcasts, like Blogcast FM, which eventually Srini Rao eventually became Unmistakable Creative. Pat Flynn was podcasting back then. There were some early podcasts. My friend Jordan Harbinger, Art of Charm, was his podcast at the time. So like I was listening to these podcasts, and it was popular, these people I was following were going from starting a blog to starting a podcast. And so I was like, well, I'm going to start doing it. And I just started very limited, just started reaching out to people, inviting them to do an interview. I mean, I think I did some text-based interviews. I did articles. I wrote books. I did all these different things. Eventually, I figured out that podcast was the right combination of allowing me to focus on what I wanted to focus on, and not having to the things that you couldn't duplicate yourself. So you can't duplicate us, like this conversation, the two of us, right? No matter all the chat GPT in the world is not going to duplicate that. So I figured maximizing that with minimizing the amount of additional work that I had to do, like on the back end. So like I wrote for Forbes for a while, but that was a pain because I would open the door for anyone, but the problem is then I had to write these long articles. It was hard approval process, all that kind of stuff. And so I do maybe 10 of them throughout the year. With a podcast, you can do 50, 60, 70. And then it's really just this conversation. And then after, on the back end, you can have other people actually produce the episode for you, which is what we obviously do now. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Did you have a knack or passion for interviewing people? Because I think that's why I'm curious. Because and maybe on top of this question, John, is like, why do you think most people stop or don't do it?
I definitely had an interest in it. So I was editor of my high school newspaper. I did radio in college. My father was a journalist. I joke that my mom actually is a better interviewer than my dad, because even though my dad was a journalist and interviewed people for a living when I was growing up, my mom, whenever people came over to the house, my mom was better at asking questions and really delving into their background and stuff like that. So I observed that a lot as well. And so, I dabbled in, high school journalism and a little bit of writing, for the newspaper in college, and doing radio and all that kind of stuff. So I did. I liked hearing people's stories, and also I'm Irish, and the Irish are like kind of hardwired to like gather over a pint and exchange stories. And I realized I just love that. I love exchanging stories with people, whether it's, over a microphone over Zoom or doing it in person. So I definitely was drawn to it from the beginning.
Which very helpful. And I was reading your Forbes article, and maybe give the listeners a peer into that first interview, because I think that was an interesting way of like connecting the dots of like how you got into it, because it was actually you were working, but then doing an interview, right? And then it kind of
Yeah.
like translated into what you're doing now.
Yeah. So one of the first people that I did an interview for was a client, a legal client. So I was practicing law. I was an attorney at the time. And he came to me for a tiny little matter. It wanted me to write a lease on a spare bedroom on his house. These days, you just throw it up on Airbnb, but that wasn't around back then. So I wrote a lease on this spare bedroom. But I did some research on the guy and I was like, wow, he's really interesting. He started businesses, gone public, been a serial entrepreneur, just really interesting guy. And I was like, I'd love to have this guy as a long-term client. So kind of on a whim, I was just like, hey, can I interview you? I'll do it we'll record it over video Skype at the time. I did it. And at the end of the conversation, he was like, hey, this was great. This was a lot of fun. Can you help me with some more projects? I got a couple other legal projects that you could do. And I was like, he was like light bulb moment. It was like, well, that works really well. I can keep on doing this over and over again. And I saw other people that were doing it. And so I've been doing it ever since. And it's just one of these things that whenever I think about quitting it, I realize that the alternative is so much harder and so much more difficult and more time consuming, like going to conferences, going to lunches, going to coffees with people, whatever you used in order to network and build relationships and connect with people. I found all those other things are just a lot harder to do than having a podcast. So that's why I've continued doing it all this time.
My guess is you don't think it's binary though, podcasting or those things.
Absolutely. You can definitely keep doing those things. I still go to conferences. I'm going to an event in a week and a half. I'm going to, another conference after that in Colorado. But I also have young kids at home. And so I want to limit the amount that I have to do that. I want to be selective about the times that I do that. And there are many times that I end up meeting people at a conference that I interviewed previously. I'm a member of Entrepreneurs Organization. It's got 18,000 members worldwide. It's an amazing community. But 2 years ago, I hadn't been a member for very long, and I went to their conference in Washington, D.C. And, I'm a new member. I'm feeling a little insecure. Who am I going to know here? Well, guess what? I knew a ton of people there. I knew the CEO of the organization. I knew the president of the board. I knew speakers. People were stopping me in the hallway because I had very deliberately, before I went to the conference, I'd interviewed a bunch of the different people that were members of that organization. So you actually get more out of a conference when you've used the podcast beforehand, as well as after the fact, because, you go to a conference, you meet a bunch of people, and what happens afterwards? Very little, right? A lot of times you don't follow up with them.
You got a stack of these. And
exactly.
You're like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with these?
Exactly. And the more successful, the busier people are, the less likely they're going to want to hop on a 15-minute get to know you call, right? Or a follow-up call or something like that, unless there's a direct, opportunity or something, or they want to, avail themselves of your services, which is not always the case. There's many times where, the timing's not right or something like that, but you want to build a relationship with them. So the podcast is a great way for you to take someone that you've met in person and then continue that conversation. I like to say that, a podcast is like an online tool that helps you strengthen offline relationships. And you could also use offline activities in order to strengthen relationships you've established online using a podcast. So like you and I have never met face to face, but whenever we do, the next time we're in a city together, a conference or something like that, we will have that much more of a connection because we've already had this experience together.
Yeah, it's the way I've worded it to people, John, because I share your enthusiasm about it. I mean, I wouldn't have been doing this every single week for almost 8 years if I didn't think it was worth it. And it's like a mini flywheel on your sales and marketing is how I view it. And so how many interviews have you got under your belt now?
I've lost track. Officially, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 or 600, but I've done way more than that because I've published them on different podcasts. I'm estimating I've probably interviewed 1,200 to 1,400 people.
That's amazing, man. Like, how do you even synthesize what you've learned?
That's a great question. Lately I've been reading about, some of these new tools that are coming out, like Notion, and there's one called Obsidian that people use in order to capture their knowledge, and kind of develop like a second brain, because we all learn so much these days, and there are tools that are allowing us to capture that information if we can put it in a form that's usable. I haven't done any of that, so I would like to do that.
I was like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah. No, I'm not an expert in that at all. In fact, there are many times that I've forgotten that I've interviewed people. So there's so many people that have gone by. But there's other times, many other times where, I something clicks and I interview someone new and I'm like, oh, this person really should meet this other person that I interviewed. And
Hmm.
then I offer to make an introduction to both of them. They connect. And I've had people that have started businesses together. I've had people that have, established incredible friendships. Jeremy, my business partner, and we connected two guys who became amazing friends. Their families became friends. They went on vacations together. Eventually, one of them actually ended up moving to Puerto Rico and convinced the other one to move his family to Puerto Rico. I mean, we're talking about major life changes that have
Right,
happened,
right.
and they happen because of a deliberate effort to build relationships with people that you want to connect with. And
Yeah.
that's a really important point, because there are some people that get into doing this and they end up interviewing just anyone under the sun. They're not specific, they're not deliberate about it, they aren't not thoughtful about it, and they end up kind of spinning their wheels and wasting their time, and they give up after 6 months. I think the reason that you've kept on doing it is because you've been deliberate and intentional about who do I really want to connect with, and you've continued doing it because of that, because you've made right choices.
I amen to that, because case in point right here, ADHD. I have lots of flashy objects, lots of things I'm interested in, and to funnel that energy, John, into one area has been very helpful for me, because I expend the energy that I would probably be messing a lot of other things up. Like, because I would go out and do these activities no matter what. I just am now my energy is funneled and captured in part of a bigger flywheel. So I want to explain kind of how I've thought about this, and I'm curious on your journey and how you chose or how it happened for you. So like when I had my experience selling the business, and it was my like therapy of trying to understand what the hell had happened. So that's why I started, and it was easy to keep pulling the thread, because I was like, I just want to learn what happened to me. And so I kept pulling that. And then there was a business model that became that I should say now I have, when I went through essentially a couple iterations of a business model, John. But
Yeah.
now, I mean, like everything has been tied to the same topic. And I'm curious, and we can unpack that more. And I know it has a lot to do with how you're helping people right now. I want to dive into that. But like when you had said that you started off as an attorney and you were interviewing a client, you could have done the same thing, which is had a podcast about like legal or some sort of topic that was, to you being the thought leader of the legal field or whatever field that you're in, and monetizing that way. How did that all unfold that you ended up at Rise 25 and what you're doing now, instead of being an attorney with a podcast?
Well, it definitely evolved over time. But what I like to say is that it's like personal and professional development, which doubles as content marketing. So,
Mhm.
as you're doing this investigation, I think you and I are similar in that I love learning new information. I love, I will go down all kinds of rabbit holes watching YouTube videos and reading blog posts and all kinds of different stuff. And you can spin your wheels a lot doing all that kind of stuff. But if you're also if in the process of doing that, you're capturing that and creating content marketing, which is what you're doing when you're interviewing
Mhm.
someone on
Mhm.
a topic and learning about that topic, you're getting more mileage out of that time that you're devoting. Instead of spending hundreds of hours of a year educating yourself about all these different micro topics, and it doesn't create any content marketing, you're also creating content marketing, which then brings people back to you and builds your brand, builds your business, all that kind of stuff. So that's really valuable. But for me, I mean, some of my earliest interviews when I was still practicing law and I was just focused on that business, I just interviewed other attorneys in my local community. And I live in relatively small community. It's a couple 100,000 people outside of San Francisco Bay Area. The legal community is even smaller than that. And then even smaller than that was what I was doing, which was real estate and land use primarily. Eventually, I
Mhm.
gravitated into working with small businesses. And I, again, used the podcast each time in order to build more relationships. So I interviewed I started by interviewing other attorneys that were more seasoned than me, that have more years of experience than me. And even if they were competitors, what ended up happening is they were so indebted and grateful to me for featuring them in this episode on a podcast, that what I found was in the weeks following, a lot of times these people would turn around and then they would get a referral to some business that wasn't a good fit for them, and they would refer it to me. So I'd end up getting all this kind of, business from it. over time, eventually, I took more interest in working with small businesses and entrepreneurs. And so I shifted my focus and I started, I used that in order to interview attorneys that were working in that area and build relationships with them. And then I started interviewing local businesses, and I interviewed the local kind of like independent baseball league team owner, and I interviewed this guy who had an small organic ice cream shop, and I talked on the phone to the founder of Lagunitas, the beer chain. I'm a big fan of Lagunitas beer.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to interview him on my podcast, and we just never aligned up schedules and stuff like that.
Oh, bummer, man! I want to know what's up with that. Like, have you ever read the thing around the label, John?
Oh, I know, right? Well, he designed all those himself.
That's why that would have been so awesome.
Yeah, I know. But what I regret is that I didn't push harder on that in the early days. And what I say to people now is take advantage of it now, because the next wave of billionaires, the next wave of huge, iconic Richard Branson's, Elon Musk's, interview them now so that when they're huge 10 years from now, you've got a relationship with them because you helped them early on. And I'm not exaggerating. This is me and Elon Musk 12 years ago. I met him at an event because I was a fan of his company before a lot of people knew who Elon Musk was. And I regret that I didn't push harder on that. I didn't say, hey, let's do an interview for a podcast after I met him at a physical live in-person event. So I say to people all the time, do it now, build those relationships. That will be your network in the future.
I don't think that there's anything I can do for the listeners right now to stress what you just said enough, John. It's been life-changing for me. I didn't know that at all, what you just said. And I think that's the biggest, because it's such a long game. And because you think that, I just want to be, I'm speaking out of myself here, but I want access to those people. And you're kind of forgetting about all the people who will eventually be those people when we're all that age or something like that. And it's just slowly kind of happens.
And a lot of times people are thinking I only want to interview Oprah Winfrey now. It's that might be a little challenging, but you could interview someone who's going to be Oprah Winfrey in the future, and
right.
They're probably not, building a TV show. They're building a TikTok channel, or they're building an Instagram channel, or they're becoming a big influencer, or they have a business that's just tiny right now, but it's going to be huge one day.
Right. It's so true. So as with all these interviews, John, what are some things that you've learned that have changed how you manage your life?
So many things. I mean, so there's a guy named Kevin Thompson who he actually was a commercial fisherman, kind of like the deadliest catch type of thing for many years. And he did that and decided it was too dangerous. He had a young family. He didn't want to do it anymore. So he needed to start something else. He ended up getting, this is 15 years ago or something like that, getting into doing these like a house cleaning type of business, or coming in, I think it was carpet cleaning. And then he moved from that to then educating carpet cleaners. And he started doing these there's teleseminars back then. Mm-hmm. And he would educate people. And so it's a kind of a one-to-many model. But he realized that the more effective way to do it was to reach out and connect with people that had communities of people that were interested in these teleseminars, partner with them, and then do a teleseminar. These days it's more a webinar or something like that. I interviewed him about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, something like that. And it was such an aha moment, because at the time I was trying to do webinars and I was struggling. I didn't have a large email list. I was building digital courses, and it was like an aha. I was like, well, I can do that. I can connect with people that have got other communities using my podcast. And so that's what I did. And so for many years, actually, my business was primarily using the podcast to get access and conversation with someone who'd be a great strategic partner of some sort, interviewing them. And then after that, talking about ways in which we could collaborate, primarily doing a webinar, either for my audience or for their audience. So a strategic partnership, a joint venture, that sort of thing. And that was one conversation on a podcast that changed the trajectory of my business. It led to me being able to phase out of practicing law and focus on doing more podcasts, creating more content marketing, which eventually evolved into what became Rise 25. But it was definitely, I look at that and I'm like, man, that was a real turning point, because it was such an aha moment just talking to him. And that's just one example. There's dozens of examples of times where I've had conversations with people where it's just like, aha, and I, have an idea. I'm like, I can definitely do that. I can follow through on that.
It's you said one word that really hit me. It's access. And like, so I think podcasting, it completely shifted how people access other individuals. And like, cause I grew up in sales, John. I mean, like literally my job was to professionally interrupt people and ruin and ruin their day.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
hey, by the way, whatever you're doing, let's
that
look
was the
over
model,
here.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then it was quickly build trust. And so like, however way possible, whether it was lunches or cards or, all that kind of stuff. And I remember sitting on the beach in Florida. I was in Fort Lauderdale. It was 2015. And I listened to someone talking about podcasts and like, yeah, if you ask people, like 90% of the people say yes. And I was like, what? I've never had that happen in my life with sales. Like, sure, I'll talk to you. I'm like, what? And so it's just, when I think about, John, you said so many people don't do it. It's so fascinating to me because when we think about business and life, it's about building relationships, building trust, and then moving forward together. What is the deal with people? Like, because every time I end up talking to people, they're like, if only I met this person or knew this, or, you know what I mean? It's a lot of relationships that would change their life, but then they're not doing things that are potentially going to get them there.
There's a million different things that stop people. Part of it is when people have been doing something a certain way for a little while, they're just not, eager to try something new. So people are reluctant to try something new, and generally not to be ageist or anything, because I'm getting up there in age now. But I mean, I think I find that people that are interested in starting a podcast, using it for networking purposes, they're really in like the age band of like 25 to around 50. After 50, generally people get into kind of they've been doing things a certain way for a long time, networking, business development, stuff like that, and they're less likely to change. That's overgeneralization, but that does happen. And there's so many things that stop people. They're like there's psychological barriers, there's technical barriers, there's insecurities that people have that come out from doing this. You're like, well, why would some so-and-so big shot in my industry be willing to talk to me? There's questions about what questions that I ask. Most of these are overcomable. I talk to people, right. I'm like, what questions are you going to ask? You talk to people all day long. You're an expert. You've been doing this industry for X number of years. What makes you think that you're not going to be able to ask questions? You'll be fine. You'll be great at it, So there's just like a lot of different things. And then also, creating podcasts today I say it's roughly where, creating websites was about 20 years ago. It was pre-Wix, pre-Squarespace, on the verge of like WordPress coming along. It was a mess. It was really hard to create a website back then. Yeah. And it still is now with podcasting. There are tools that are coming out. We're using Riverside here. There's Descript, there's stuff like that. It's still very overwhelming for people. There's no like one-stop shop plug and play solution of a Wix or a Squarespace type of nature. That's what we're seeking to build for our company, to be the Wix or the Squarespace of B2B podcasting.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah. And
I fully support you here, man.
Yeah.
Full support.
Yeah, because I've been there. I mean, I know, I remember like 13 years ago trying to figure this stuff out, watching a bunch of videos on YouTube and reading things online. And even once I got it up and running, after 5 years, 1 year, I didn't put out a single episode. And I was interviewing people. That part I got, but the problem was that I'd hired a guy to do editing. I had a crappy system set up, and I would send him an email with something to record. He'd email me back a week later and be like, "That link didn't work," and then I'd forget about it. And then 3 weeks later, I'd be like, "Wait, have I published that episode? I don't even remember what I said on that episode." And then I'd have to like re-listen to it. It was a total mess, and that was actually what happened. Was about 5 years into it, Jeremy, my business partner, and I had become business partners. We had a different business. And I was like, you're putting out 100 pieces of content a year on your podcast, and I am not putting out any. I'm doing something wrong. What did you put in place that's so much better? And, and he's very modest about this, but he worked with one of the very early business podcasts in the mid 2000s, helped them put a lot of their systems and processes in place. Everyone that came after that, a lot of them modeled that stuff, including Tim Ferriss, and some of the big business podcasters really like modeled a lot of the stuff that he innovated a long time ago. So he put that in place for me. And I went from putting out no episodes to putting out 52, one per week. the next year, just far more effective. It probably took me less time because I stripped out the stuff that I shouldn't be doing and I focused on the things that I should be doing, which is where we started the conversation, which is having conversations with the people that I should be having conversations with.
Pardon the interruption. I hope you're enjoying the conversation with John. If you're interested in podcasting as a strategy for sales and marketing for you and your company, what I would suggest is having the lens of what is your target equity valuation at a point in time and understanding how many clients and what kind of profitability and the different products and services that you need. And will podcasting enhance your strategy by getting you to your valuation faster or having a higher valuation or creating more leverage so you're reducing your cost structure in your sales and marketing department because of this strategy? And if that all makes sense, then you can start thinking about an actual strategy and how many people do you need to close using this strategy? Who should be your target people that you want to be interviewing? And what's the purpose of the podcast? If you want to dive further into the Intentional Growth Academy, you'll get more data on how to think about this with the case study that I show in Principle 4 about projecting out the valuation of a company using the 3 financial statements so you can start to think about the return on investment. Then you can layer on what John's talking about. There's a coupon code for $500 off. So the do-it-yourself online academy with the 10 hours and 72 videos is $9.95. And there's a link in the show notes below. And if you're interested, I highly recommend reaching out to John because don't try to do it all yourself. Trust me. Find the people to help you augment the things that you're not good at. And then if you're the person behind the mic, get in front of the mic and build relationships and close more deals so you can get to your target equity valuation faster. Let's talk about, for the listeners in here, that what industries and type of businesses does podcasting apply to in your mind, and what work, like, is there specific industries or business models, and what has worked and not worked in your experience?
Yeah, so we just focus on B2B businesses. It doesn't mean that it won't work for a B2C type of business. Like Trader Joe's started a podcast that I think the rumor was they spent $1 million on 10 episodes and then didn't do any episodes after that. You know, it got attention because it was in the early days of podcasting. There are plenty of B2C businesses that create podcasts these days, but they need to have really a long view. And the problem is if you're selling $5 widgets or whatever, you got to sell a lot of those in order to make up for it.
You see people more in the business to consumer default more towards like YouTube clips or shorts and reels and stuff like that, or like the social media stuff.
They do. They do stuff like that. I mean, a lot of B2B businesses are doing that as well. So, you know, I know from my experience, well, one, I was a lawyer, so I used it for my law firm. So it'll work for law firms, M&A, IT services, any kind of consulting with a high client lifetime value. Digital agencies increasingly are doing it. Even, many of our clients are digital agencies, but they have different areas of expertise, like they're an SEO agency or they're a Google ad agency or they're a Facebook ad agency or something like that. And they want to stay in their lane and kind of focus on their area of expertise and let us handle the rest. So, yeah, I mean, like if you have a high client lifetime value, if a client is worth $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 to your business, you don't need to get that many businesses, new clients out of doing the podcast in order for it to be a huge home run for you. It is not unheard of. I have many clients that say that they can trace back multiple 7 figures of revenue to doing the podcast. And yet it's this simple thing that they're already doing. This is the other point, is that you're already having conversations with people all the time, whether you do a podcast or not, or you should be, because you are talking to people, you're talking to clients, you're talking to referral partners, you're doing business development, you're attending conferences. So all you're doing when you do a podcast is you're redirecting some of that time to doing it for the purpose of a podcast. So it doesn't take any extra time if you do it right. I actually think it takes you less time because you get access to people that you wouldn't get access to otherwise, or that it would take you years in order to actually get a conversation with them. So I actually firmly believe that if you do it right, it saves you time. And all of those things are reasons why it works.
Amen. I agree. I mean, like, I've been building my business. I'm the only biz dev person. I speak, I do podcasting, I do net news, I'm doing the training. I mean, like, I'm all over the place only because of the podcast. I mean, so completely agree with you from my experience. When you're thinking of, like, if someone's listening, and because let me put some context behind this, John, is I read one of the things that drove me to continue doing this is I read I think it's Joe Paluzzi's book, Killing Marketing, like 7 years ago or something like that. And it spoke to me, John, because he said something. There's a couple of things. It was take marketing and kill it out of your overhead SG&A and actually make it a profit center. And I was like, huh. He's like, make your marketing so valuable that people would pay for it. And he gave like Legos or Lifetime Fitness and a bunch of examples. And I was like, that I could get down with, because I was so sick and tired of being a copier sales rep that no one wanted to talk to, or an IT sales rep. And I was like, I want to provide value. So that was one thing. But then what is like, if that was why I did it, because it was like, okay, I needed leverage. But like, if someone's listening in and they're trying to figure out who in my organization should do it, is it the CEO? Is it the VP of sales? Is it marketing? Is it my technical engineer?
Yeah.
So how do you like, if someone's thinking about this from like a part of a sales and marketing flywheel, how would you, like, because you guys have a whole process on this, how do you start unpacking that?
Yeah.
That question for people.
It's funny because I always push back against people. I was talking to a couple of people yesterday. I push back when they say, we want to do this for marketing, or talk to my director of marketing. We always start talking to the CEO or the owner of the business. We don't go directly to the marketing person, because the marketing person views everything through a marketing lens. Well, if you do a podcast and you have a conversation with someone that gives you, as the owner or the CEO of the business, gives you an aha realization, an epiphany about your business that you wouldn't have gotten any other way. Well, is that marketing? No. Like, it might be an idea about how to reorganize your sales department. It might be an idea about how you're going to get a great CEO or COO to hire, or how you should reorganize the way you do your finances or something like that. That's professional development. So the podcast is many, many different things at once. It doesn't fit into one neat little category of marketing. Yes, it is sales and marketing, but it's also personal professional development. It's also networking. It's also referral marketing. It's also strategic partnerships. It's also internal training. You can use it to train your team. It's recruiting. It's all of those different things. So I totally agree that you can't just put it into this neat little bucket of marketing. Absolutely.
So man, I would give so much money to hear you guys over the years try to shift that conversation because of how people are probably sit on a meeting with you and they have all these preconceived notions. Oh, I'm going to hire John and they're going to like whip out this podcast and then it's going to be self-running while it just generates leads and I continue doing what I'm doing. How do you get people to understand that it's almost like the fabric of their organization? And here's why I'm thinking about this, John, is because, like you just said, it's a peer inside the soul of the organization or whoever's talking. And like the number one thing that I have found from it, John, is like, we're in this world where trust is at the lowest level, like, I don't know, since the 1920s or whatever. And like, no one believes anything. There's too much information. And so people are looking to figure out who to trust, and they need more substance to figure that out. So how do you help people figure out what use it's going to be for and how to calibrate their expectations for why they're going to go about doing it?
Well, we start by really understanding what are their big goals and objectives now, because the podcast needs to serve you. There's lots of people come to me and have like some crazy idea about some concept that they're going to do for the podcast. And the problem is, if you're too wedded to that, then the podcast won't serve you and your needs now, and you'll probably end up giving up on it. We had a client a while back who, said to us, like, my problem's not really top of the funnel. We have enough leads coming in. The problem's not really the offering that actually works. The problem is the middle of the funnel, converting people in the middle of the funnel. And that was the challenge he was dealing with right then. And that's why he wasn't doing podcast interviews at the time. And I said, we need to focus on that. So take a look on Amazon. Who's the world's leading expert who's written a book on converting leads in the middle of the funnel? That's exactly who you should start with. You should talk to someone like that, and you should find out how you're going to break through this challenge in your business by talking directly to the source, which is something that was unheard of before. You have to pay thousands of dollars for that. Frequently, people do a podcast interview. One, you're getting free advice by interviewing them, highlighting them. And many times then, as out of gratitude, that person afterwards, like, will keep on talking to you or give you some additional advice or something like that. So, there are many different ways to use the podcast, and it evolves and changes over time. So we start with, what are your big goals and objectives? But you have to keep on checking in on this. You have to keep on thinking about it because
Mhm.
your goals and objectives change. And I eat our own dog food. We have a client success team, and one of them meets with me on a weekly basis and is the most useful half an hour of my time each week, because so frequently I'm taking a look and I'm thinking, okay, what am I focused on now? What do I need the most? Right. And
Uh,
oftentimes the people that I'm, coming up interviewing maybe are not aligned with that. Right. So maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but it at least gives me an idea of, okay, here's who I should be reaching out to next, or who's
mhm.
a client, who's a client that has been a really valued client that I haven't talked to in a while. They're still a client, or maybe they haven't been a client for a little while. Maybe I can get them back in, or maybe I can offer some value to them. Maybe they have a book coming out and I can invite them onto my podcast so I can promote their book that's coming out. There's so many different ways to use it. So you have to kind of constantly be refreshing it and going back to have a process for going back and figuring out like what's the next way I should focus my podcast.
Love it. And so there's so many ways to use it. I love that. And your goals and objectives are always evolving. So how do you make sure that this isn't a chaotic mess of you're just randomly picking people to keep the cadence? Because like I'm guilty, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, every week, and then so you're kind of pulling people, and then if you're too busy, you kind of slightly fizzle out on like the quality, and like so like how do you how do you guys go through and connect the podcast activities to the company goals and allow that evolution without letting it go out of hand?
Yeah, I mean, well, one way of doing it, when I was practicing law, I had a piece of paper that was written next to my computer, it's just off to the side. In fact, it's still on the wall over here, where I wrote the names of all the incoming clients, the amount they were paying me, and who they were referred by. And the reason I did that was over time, I could see these repeating patterns, and you could see who is the most important person to my business. And from time to time, I would take a look at it and see like, oh, wow, like this person's referred this time, this time, this time. And there are many times that I reach back out to that person, and reconnected with them or something, someone who's referred a bunch of business. Now we have a system and a process in our business where we have a referral partner meeting where one of our team members holds my business partner and I accountable, and we're going through our list of referral partners and just kind of like refreshing our recollection. Okay, who do we need to be following up with? Who's the most valuable person? And just like that process of going through those names will allow you to kind of remember, oh wow, this person's referred 3 people recently. We should do something else with them. Maybe we invite them on the podcast. Maybe we do something else. Maybe we reach out to see if they're going to be an upcoming conference and we can meet them face to face. Maybe we make sure that we're sending them gifts in the mail because we have a gifting program that we send in the mail. And by the way, there's many other things that you can do on top of the podcast. I'm not saying that you do all of them because when I started, all I did was just the podcast, but it's kind of the backbone that allows you to do many additional things. So
Yeah, I
now
agree.
we do a podcast interview. We take it and first of all, it's a great way to be top of mind with your entire network because those people that you've interviewed will then, follow you, connect with you on LinkedIn. They'll probably be on your email list if you have one, and they will follow you on whatever podcast player that they follow you on. So when you keep on putting out content, you're top of mind with all those people. So many times I bump into people at a conference or something like that, and they're like, oh yeah, I just saw this episode that you put out, or you saw a little snippet that you shared on LinkedIn. But it starts again with that backbone of the podcast, which then you can push out in different ways. Now we even take it and we utilize it in many other ways. So we use it for internal training. We have a physical paper and ink newsletter, retro, I know, that we send out, and we take little snippets, little excerpts from the podcast interviews, and we put that into the physical newsletter. So it creates content for that. So there's many other ways you can do that. And then you can use that to be top of mind with all these different people.
Love it, man. Absolutely love it. And I know you guys have a bigger machine than I do, and you guys, because I think you and I have talked, or no, I talked to Dr. Jeremy. Like, I want to figure out how you guys can help enhance my machine. But when I think about all the applications for this, John, for the listeners who are thinking about it, what should be their expectations for time, investment, and like what they're trying to get out of it. Because my guess is my guess is your team has to do a lot of that synthesizing of their expectations, what they're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
Hey, am I going to get 1 million downloads the first year? Like, how do you guys like,
Yeah.
what should someone be expecting for time, expense,
Yeah.
and return?
Well, first of all, as far as downloads go, who cares if you get 100 downloads or 100,000 downloads? What matters is, are you getting clients? Are you getting leads? Are you getting referrals? Are you getting strategic partnerships? Are you getting actual concrete results for your business? So we don't care about vanity metrics. We don't care about how many TikTok views you get.
Thank you.
Yes, we
Thank
care about
you.
actual results.
Thank you.
That's what matters the most. So that's what we really focus on. And you know, sometimes it requires people to recalibrate on that idea of like, I got to get a ton of downloads. I know tons of people that have gotten a ton of downloads and then given up anyways because they weren't actually getting actual concrete results for their business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're talking like millions of downloads and they put it on hold. They stop because they haven't figured out a business model behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're much more focused about is using it to build and deepen relationships. You know, that's what's most important.
And you said the business model behind it. Dude, I just love that. Like, it's not just someone trying to get downloads for vanity metrics. I love it so much.
Exactly. You know, and that's part of the reason that we don't take clients that have a brand new business that they're trying to figure out. You know, they haven't gotten a product market fit yet. They haven't figured out who they're serving or what their exact offering is, because what'll often happen is that they'll do it for 6 months and then they'll give up and they'll think that the podcast is to blame, but the real blame is that the business hasn't really been fully matured yet. You know, you need a more mature business. Once you have that product market fit, then the podcast can really help you to, you know, throw some fuel on the fire, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing it is amazing for is it's really a market research tool, because it's an amazing tool in order to be able to talk to your clients or prospective clients and ask them about what their challenges are, what they're focused on, you know, what their, you know, what would be an amazing solution for them. You can ask all these types of questions. And it really, you know, many of our clients have said that it just gave them amazing insight into the way that their clients think, that it then allows them to, you know, do sales and marketing and to communicate to their clients and really alter their offering in ways that are more compelling for their market. So, you know, all that's important.
So love it. You got business. So necessary is a business model with a set of applications they want to use it for, whatever they've figured that out. And then the downloads have to be tied to their expectations for their business model and for the return. So then what are they? And I don't want to pin you down because my guess is you guys have all these varying range of services, but like if someone was to do one podcast a week, what is the range of, if the do it for you, maybe, and again, I don't want to put you on the spot for anything that you're not comfortable with, but I just want to help people think through, like, because if they have a business model, if they got a clear vision and they got maybe sales and marketing, like, is this something they should do? And hopefully we're helping people burst through those limiting beliefs. Like, is there any range you're willing to share?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, look, we only work with B2B businesses where you've got a high client lifetime value. So, you know, you get, you know, 15,000, 30,000, 100,000. I don't care what it is, 500,000. It doesn't matter. As long as it's substantial enough that, you know, you get a couple of clients and it's going to be, you know, a big success for you.
Yep.
What you can expect to pay, you know, it's gone up a lot in recent years with inflation and everything, but it really depends on a number of different factors. So, you know, when I talk to people that are thinking about doing a podcast, the types of questions they ask are frequency. Should I do audio versus video? You know, should I be promoting it on all these other different channels and things like that? And oftentimes I'm the one who's talking them out of doing all those other things because it can get very expensive very quickly. What I'd much rather have happen is that people get in the habit and the discipline of focusing a lot of their business development into the podcast. And they may be doing a bunch of other different things, which they can continue doing or they can put on pause. It depends on their situation. But, you know, they really want to get that discipline, that habit in place. And generally, we recommend people that aim for doing a weekly podcast, because the reason is, over the course of a year, even if you take some vacations, let's say you do 40, 50 interviews a year, whatever that number is, that number of conversations, if you're having the conversation with the right types of people, is going to really move the needle. You know, some people talk about, well, I'm going to do a monthly podcast. Well, So then you do 10, 11 conversations over the course of a year. That's much less
You know
likely
what
to
I say to
actually.
people, John? I'm like, that's called a webinar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, it's less likely to have, really move the needle for the business, to have a substantial impact, and then as far as costs go, I mean, personally, we've got clients that pay us over $10,000 a month. We've got clients that also pay us around $1,000 a month. It really depends on what they need and what they don't need. And I always
You guys
start there
pretty much,
because I'm often talking them out of things.
yeah, which I love, by the way, and that is so, like, if I would have had you, man, 8 years
The
ago,
other
I
thing,
would have stopped so many things.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say is that we also have to understand our own limitations, right? I realized after 5 years of doing it that I am not a good project manager at all. I shouldn't be the one who's taking all the different pieces and making sure that it's all put together. Once I got myself out of that process and I could really focus on my superpower, which is having great conversations with people and, focusing on the relationship
Mhm.
piece and got myself out of the way of the other stuff, that's when things really took off for me. So, for example, we've got many clients that it is like pulling teeth to get them to email, text, or call their own client base and invite them to be a guest on their podcast for whatever reason, much less reach out to others and invite them to be on their podcast. Even though I can tell them all day long that it's not hard to do, they just won't do it. And so we built an offering where we can do that cold email for them, either to their existing client base or to prospective people that they don't know. That requires a lot of work and setup to do that kind of stuff. So I don't recommend it for everyone. But if it gets you into conversation with prospective clients, how valuable is that, right? And when you combine it with a podcast, with content marketing, it's so much more successful that most of the time we have to limit the number of conversations they can have, and they go from a challenge of, I can't get enough conversations with the type of people I want to be talking to I can't handle all of these conversations that you're getting me
Because they
into.
don't know what to do with the follow-ups and like how to, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I love it, John, because like what I heard out of that is you're so focused on making sure that people are doing the repetitions, right? You're not, what I was thinking about while you were telling the story is like, it's like, you don't go into the gym thinking you're going to go run an Ironman, right? Like you're
Yeah.
going to go in there and like, go for an hour every day. Right?
Yes.
Then you can build up. And then what you're trying to do is eliminate the friction for the things that they don't like so they can keep on the path.
Yeah, I think I don't remember, it's Charles Duhigg's Power of Habit that wrote about, like, if you want to get a jogging habit, put your running shoes by the front door, and in the morning just tell yourself that all I'm going to do is I'm going to lace up my tennis shoes, put on the shoes, and then tell yourself you're going to go for a 2-minute walk around the block or something like that. Of course, you end up doing a lot more, but when you just engage in that one little habit, it goes a lot further. And so I'd say the same thing for people is like, just send out 5 messages a week. 5 messages a week to people, inviting them to be a guest on the podcast. Just doing that one thing, everything else will line up if you do all those other things, if you do that one thing. And that's why I say that the 30 minutes a week that I meet with our own team, eating our own dog food, them holding me accountable to send out those messages are the most valuable time that I spend probably in the business all week long.
If I think there's one word that I can I keep going back to thinking about, John, it's leverage. Leverage. And it'd be interesting. I know we're going to get short here on time. I'm thinking about where podcasting is going. Because like, if I think about everything you just were talking about, what's your alternative? Hiring actual salespeople? What's 1 to 2 years to figure out whether they work? That's a couple $100,000, and them tarnishing your reputation. I mean, what are the alternatives, right? And it's not binary like we were talking about, but like that's where the current state of podcasting is. But when I think about the things that I'm excited about, John, is the leverage with AI. I mean, like, I have 374 transcribed hour to hour and a half conversations that I can have an AI brain. And that's just for content, or you got training or whatever it is. Where do you see the future of podcasting going?
Well, that's
go for
sure. That's exciting. We recommend that people take a portion of their podcast interviews, it could be 10%, and create what we call thought leadership episodes, which is where you're really sharing your own wisdom and expertise. and you're using your own media marketing channel, not just to promote other people, but to share resources that can accelerate your sales cycle, that can educate your internal team, that can create internal training, programs, stuff like that. Before Jeremy and I started working together, I'd maybe done that 3 or 4 times because you get busy. It's so hard to just, turn on the microphone. You want to spend an hour and a half scripting it beforehand. Pretty soon you run out of steam. So it's just really rare that it happens. Instead, what we do is we do a two-way conversation. And when you do a two-way conversation, you're much more likely to do it. We have professional interviewers that do it with our clients. And so now we actually have dozens and dozens of episodes that are two-way conversations on different discrete topics. And we've already started taking those pieces and then feeding them into AI tools that can then spit out all kinds of answers. And it can help with your customer support. It can help with answering frequently asked questions. You can help with the internal team. You can help with all these different things. But yeah, you're right. There's all that knowledge that you've captured, and that, thanks to new AI tools, you can utilize it in new and exciting ways.
Yeah, man, it's leverage. Like we had this conversation. So like, I'm going to end up sending this conversation to every single person that asks me about podcasting.
Imagine if, in addition to sending them the hour-long recording that they can listen to, imagine in the not too distant future, you could send them a link to an app or something, and you can say, I interviewed John Corcoran for my, about podcasting on my podcast. Here's an AI bot. You can ask him any question. So instead of listening to the entire thing, the AI bot's trained on the hour-long conversation, and they could ask me a question that they're curious about and get right to the answer. Right? We're not that far off from that being a reality. That's a reality today. That can happen. Yeah.
John, that is so awesome. Man, this has been a lot of fun. Is there anything I haven't asked that I should?
I don't think so. As far as, B2B podcasting is concerned, I mean, I say to people that all the time, I hear from people all the time that have given me all kinds of excuses why they haven't gotten started, from couldn't come up with a name, to weren't sure what microphone to buy, to weren't sure what software to use, to not sure how I'm going to get guests to say yes. These are all common questions that we get from people. They're all overcomeable. The best thing you can do is just get started with this. You will learn how to speak better. It can make you a better speaker. It will grow your network over time. You'll build and deepen relationships with existing relationships, because reaching out to people, your current champions, your current, great clients, are a great way to get introductions to other people, because it makes it very easy for them to introduce you to other people. So there's so many great things that can come from it. I'm a huge advocate of the medium, and I tell people all the time they should do it. Unfortunately, there's just enough of a barrier now. Like we said, it's like web development was 20 years ago, that there's still many people that don't want to do it, or they think, oh, there's so many podcasts right now, and so why, how would I be different? Why would I start one? It does. None of that matters. You would do it. You are unique. You would do it differently. So I tell people all the time, seriously consider it, because it's such a benefit to your life. You will be glad that you did it.
Amen, man. And it's like what I was thinking about when you said that is, just because someone else has a sales force doesn't mean you shouldn't have a sales force, or just because someone has a website doesn't mean you shouldn't, right?
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with it.
Right. Every book that's ever been written has been written already, right? So why would you do another book, right? It's already been written,
Yeah, exactly. This has been a blast, man. What does the word intentional mean to you? I ask it because it's the name of the show, and I love hearing people's responses.
Man, intentional. For me, it is thinking through where you are, where you should be going, and how you're going to get there, and taking the time to pause and think those things through in a quiet space where you're not distracted by the day-to-day is kind of one of the best things you can do.
Wow, man. I love it. Where can everybody find you at Rise25? Reach out if they got questions about podcasting.
Yeah, rise25.com, John at Rise25, Jeremy at Rise25, my business partner, or support at Rise25. Any of those will work. I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there, and happy to chat with anyone about podcasting.
John, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been a blast, man.
Thank you, Ryan. I loved it.